And I could stand here and talk to you about how all of this absolutely sucks, how I just feel like crying because it's so unfair and so stupid. But instead, I'll tell you about the choice to make of getting pissed off instead of depressed at this global crisis we face, this mess that has been left for us, for my generation. Because luckily enough, the youth are actually quite good at the art of getting pissed off at a multitude of things, including this human-induced apocalypse. My name is Hanna Höijer, and I'm a 19-year-old student and climate activist, most recently awarded as the Young Changemaker of the Year. I might not be the kind of activist you first think of. I only blocked one road last year. But amongst other things, I currently act as Finland's youth delegate for climate, meaning that I represent the voice of my generation formally in both national and international climate politics, including at the United Nations. And so my work is largely about being the only young person in various adult spaces. My first proper experiences with this were at the age of 17 at meetings of Finland's National Committee for Sustainable Development. You know, these fancy meetings with fancy people chaired by our Prime Minister. And believe it or not, I was quite scared, I was nervous, I was self-conscious walking into those meetings for the first time. Because being the only person in those rooms under the age of 20, by far, you easily feel pressure to adopt your behavior, to sort of mimic those around you, as you desperately want to fit in with those, wise and experienced adults there. But now, working in the environmental field, having become increasingly aware of the mess the older generations have created and continue to create, makes me want not to do that anymore. Perceiving the current societal discourse amongst older generations has convinced me that those guys might not always be the best example. So, instead, I have learned to embrace what differentiates me in those adult spaces. And I think that not only should my generation embrace these unique qualities we contribute, instead of trying to reach this kind of preset model of a professional, but more than that, I actually think adults should mimic us a bit more in return. The many unique qualities my generation contributes are not only something not to be ashamed of, but instead they might be exactly what we need to save the world. So, in today's talk, I will discuss 3 key characteristics that I have identified in the young people I've had the pleasure of working with on my extensive journey in politics and activism. To begin with, I will talk about being passionately inexperienced. Because getting pissed off is about embracing this attitude of fine, I'll do it myself. However, when addressing global crises, it can be hard to know exactly what to do. And mind you, this is not yet the aspect unique to younger generations, because no one really knows what the hell we should be doing. But what is unique is how comfortable young people are with not knowing, with being inexperienced. Illustrations of this are again those meetings of the Committee for Sustainable Development that I attend as a representative of the Youth Agenda 2030 group. Because while I was nervous and scared walking into those meetings, there I actually quickly realized that the adults don't know how to implement the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals either. And that the only real difference between me and them was their eagerness to learn, or lack thereof. Because while I was at those meetings genuinely out of passion to learn, to make a difference, most people seem to be there to catch up on work emails and to contribute one pre-written comment to the supposed dialogue that no one was actually engaging in. So that's when I realized that not only am I inexperienced with the substance of the meeting, but I was also inexperienced with close to nothing being achieved in those meetings. The passive nature of political work just isn't as normalized to younger person than it is to those with more experience. To put it bluntly, my generation isn't used to nothing being done about shit, and thus we aren't ready to accept that. A good example of this is the Youth Climate Summit I organized last fall as the climate delegate. I'm actually the youngest youth delegate Finland has ever had, and when elected, I had no organizational experience, really, apart from my board positions at Youth Agenda 2030 and later at UN Youth of Finland. And still, the first thing I set my mind on upon being elected was this vision of a huge summit that would bring youth across Finland together, no matter their background or experience or party affiliation, brought together for the sake of climate. Embarking on this project, I had no idea what I was doing, So naturally, I found an incredible team of 14 young volunteers who were equally inexperienced, united by our passion for this extraordinary vision. And after countless nights on Google Meet, 75,000 euros in private funding that we raised, and hundreds upon hundreds of hours of volunteer work, we made that summit, the live gathering of 600 young people, a reality. And I genuinely believe that we wouldn't have accomplished that if we wouldn't have been as inexperienced as we were. If a rational, experienced person would have heard of our vision and the 2 mere months we had to execute it, they simply wouldn't have thought it feasible. This is in fact something we heard from many of the funders we approached. And yet, instead of asking why or how, our passionate inexperience raised the question of why not? Why not reserve the whole Helsinki Convention Center? Why not simply approach companies asking for thousands of euros in funding? Why not organize a nationally broadcasted presidential climate debate? And 2 months later, I was there on stage moderating a debate between the top 5 presidential candidates that was broadcasted nationally by not one, but 2 of Finland's biggest news outlets. In the end, when you are inexperienced enough, where you aren't really too comfortable with anything, it becomes remarkably easy to be outside your comfort zone. Being this inexperienced, yet passionate in what we do, allows the youth to do things that otherwise wouldn't be done. It allows us to be visionaries. And that is the beauty with getting pissed off enough to start doing things yourself. And this idea of us doing things our own way brings me to my second point on the incredible capacity youth hold for having the courage to be just appropriately annoying. Another characteristic that innately follows from getting properly pissed off. Young climate activists like Greta Thunberg and her school strikes, or the Extinction Rebellion and their roadblocks, are often branded as annoying or dumb or pointless. However, I will illustrate why this courage to be annoying is actually highly necessary by taking you on a short little trip to Dubai. It's midnight, 12th of December 2023, at the United Nations Climate Change Conference venue. I am there, standing and holding hands with hundreds of young people, with each and every one of us being absolutely pissed off. We just received the first resolution proposal for the conference, and that proposal is deplorable. It does nothing to reflect actually fruitful negotiations of the previous 2 weeks. Well, demonstrations are actually illegal in Dubai, so we stand there silently, but we stand there nevertheless. And by holding each other's hands, we are actually forming a corridor into the main negotiation room, a corridor that the ministers of every country in the world has to walk through. For high ambition countries, our presence is a show of support, while for those ministers that are considering accepting the proposal, our corridor is a walk of shame. And you can see visible annoyance from those ministers when they're forced to walk past us. Some try to sort of avoid our eyes, or some try to even sort of go around us. And yet, us standing there as a reminder of what is at stake might have been the most important thing we actually did in Dubai. And while this characteristic of having the courage to be annoying is most prevalent in this particular anecdote from Dubai, it is actually connected more widely to my role as the youth representative in Finnish delegations to international conferences. Last night I came home from Brussels, where I met with other European climate delegates. And that's simply because ultimately our role is the same. Our role is to push and push and push. Push for more ambition, push for more funding, push for more justice. And don't get me wrong, that's not our only role. Us youth, we have genuine substance expertise and knowledge that we should contribute to environmental policymaking. But still, one part of our role is and will be being that generation that always has the courage to ask for more, annoying or not. And the goal with this is not to instigate polarization or to discredit the genuine progress that has been made. I consider myself privileged as I get to see the incredible work countless people do across the globe every single day to make this world a better place. But while it is important to recognize that progress, it's not mutually exclusive with our role as the annoying generation that isn't afraid to call you out and demand for more. As long as we are facing the existential threat of climate change, the youth will come together to form that corridor, to be that reminder of what is at stake. Now, what we were actually protesting for there in Dubai was for the United Arab Emirates, so one of the biggest oil-producing countries in the world, to willingly admit that oil and other fossil fuels have no future. So this illustrates the third and final of my points really well, which is the youth's capacity for such stubborn optimism that it's even to the extent of us being naive, which is actually a prerequisite for becoming properly and effectively pissed off. Similarly to being called annoying, the word naive is often used to insult or discredit young people when it comes to our work or demands on ambitious climate action. But frankly, I don't find myself insulted at all. If it is naive to dream and fight for a world where we wouldn't actively destroy our own home, please count me in, guilty as charged. And when you say these things as a climate activist, like, oh, can we just, not burn our own home? Some people will hit back with the killer argument of, oh, you're just too young to understand, because, economics and stuff and blah, blah, blah. And those people are right. I don't understand. I don't understand why it's that hard. Because yes, the climate crisis, it is complicated. Sure, it is highly nuanced. But I argue that the first step in solving it doesn't necessarily need to be that. The first step could be as simple as the international community coming together and deciding to prioritize it, realizing the proven severity of this crisis. Call me naive, but the first step could be as simple as us just deciding to do something about it, like we did with COVID-19, with ozone depletion, with countless conflicts and other crises across the globe. In fact, the climate crisis is one of the few things that the whole of humankind truly shares. And still, instead of this common enemy uniting us, it acts to polarize older generations. Before Dubai, for example, we had experienced the hottest year ever on record, with detrimental heat waves and fires and droughts across the planet. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, this would make it easier for us to find common ground in the negotiations. And yet, instead of prioritizing effective climate action that would truly benefit everyone, the same old attitudes of prioritizing money and national interest over that remained at play. Maybe I was naive, but I really thought we could have achieved more. And the most naive part is that I believe we still can, and I genuinely believe that we still will, even after years and years of inadequate action. And the main reason for this stubborn optimism of mine is the young people I get to work with. At Dubai, for example, we didn't only annoy ministers, but we also hosted the Global Conference of the Youth before the actual UN negotiations. And there it was remarkably easy for youth all across the globe to come together and reach consensus, no matter if talking about historical responsibility or common mitigation efforts or our desperate need to get rid of fossil fuels ASAP. And this is a stark juxtaposition to the negotiations that soon followed. This is something that could never be seen in adult negotiation rooms. And while that is sad, it still gives me so much reason for hope for the future. My generation shares this ambition, this sense of justice, this will to act that is unparalleled, and that really gives me hope for a better future. And I recognize that this point of us being the optimistic generation might seem counterintuitive to some. For example, at the presidential climate debate I moderated at the Youth Climate Summit, I asked the candidates, as well as the audience, to raise their hand if they think Finland will reach its climate neutrality goal of 2035. And while each of the 5 presidential candidates raised their hand, only 5 people in total in the audience of hundreds of young people. And our newly elected president, Alexander Stubb, laughingly said how he thought that we were supposed to be the optimistic generation. But that's exactly where I need to disagree with President Stubb. Because on the contrary, I think the fact that those young people were sitting there, despite their lack of trust in Finland's climate policy, illustrates the kind of stubborn optimism we embody. Yes, my generation will continue to call out the world on how screwed up we are. But if we weren't optimistic, we wouldn't do even that. As the delegate, I often visit schools to talk about my journey and the work I do, and afterwards the teachers or the adults always come up to me and tell me how they had no idea of just how much work I do. And that goes to show that adults don't realize the kind of work we do, and that we do this kind of work for free, simply for that dream of a better tomorrow. If I didn't have faith in that dream, I wouldn't do activism, I wouldn't work on establishing my own startup, I simply wouldn't be here today. Becoming effectively pissed off requires enough naivety that you believe that you getting pissed off will make a difference against all odds. But it also requires enough stubborn optimism to be bothered to get pissed off in the first place. I began this whole speech by saying that we are screwed. And that isn't me being dramatic or a radical climate activist, because the climate crisis is not some looming threat of the future. It is our reality today, a reality that millions of people suffer from. We are screwed, and we should recognize that, and we should act. That's what stubborn optimism is, holding on to your dreams despite recognizing just how shitty things are. Because the thing is, a lot must change, and a lot will change whether we like it or not. The only thing we have control over is the choice we can make to either continue business as usual and watch our biosphere deteriorate, aggravating conflicts and natural disasters and inequality across the globe. Or we can choose to act, to see this transition as a possibility, to not only fix our past mistakes, but to also foster a more equal, just, and sustainable future in the process. And at its core, the climate crisis is fundamentally a problem of intergenerational injustice. Because all of this, it shouldn't rely on my generation. While the youth are only subjected to harm and anxiety due to climate change, the older generation that are the sort of guilty ones that have actually caused and even benefited from causing this mess. But I'm afraid that the adults desperately need our help with cleaning this up. So, get pissed off. Do it yourself. Ask why not. Be naive. Choose to believe that the sustainability transition we face can be something beautiful. Frankly, it's not gonna be easy. Making that choice again and again, every single day, requires you to be passionate, for you to have courage, and for you to be stubbornly optimistic. And very often, it also requires you to be inexperienced, slightly annoying, and just ever so appropriately naive. But if that's what it takes to save the world, so be it. It all starts with learning from the youth and getting pissed off. Thank you.